chairperson, and if I can use the word our foreign minister said yesterday, dear geothermal friends. They are probably said hi to everyone. Well, as Auður said, I've been working on environmental impact assessment projects since 1997, and many of those are geothermal projects. And over the past 2 years, we, the VSO consulting company, have been working on environmental impact assessment in Ethiopia. And we just finished the first project last year, while others are still in progress. And with the long experience of impact assessment in Iceland and more recent experience from the impact assessment work in Ethiopia, that has cast some interesting lights on the EIA processes in these countries and in general. And although these processes have the similar objectives, the approach and the use of these processes are quite different. And as we have heard over the last couple of days, geothermal projects are unique. And the projects are also unique compared to other EIA projects. And that's why it's very interesting to compare these two different approaches in these countries and how they comply or apply to the geothermal projects. And we can learn a lot from that. And over the hopefully just 15 minutes, next 15 minutes, I will share some thoughts of what I think are possible improvement points. The outline of the presentation, I'll start by just showing the location of the project in question. And then I'll give you some information on why geothermal projects are unique, or at least different from other EIA projects. Then we go into a small comparison on 5 factors of the EIA process. First, we begin with the EIA process itself. Then we will look at the project area. Then we'll take a look at the environmental and social factors in question in both countries. And then we will look at the extent of public consultation. And finally, look at the environmental and social monitoring plan. And then a short slide at the end to take an overview of what are the points of improvement. Well, as we have often seen over the past 2 days, the high temperature area in Iceland is found in the active volcanic belt, or close by. It lies from the southwest to the northeast. And within that area, we have a high temperature and potential geothermal areas. It is estimated that we could potentially generate like 6,700 megawatts within that belt. And the project we will take a look at is at the Reykjanes Peninsula, Reykjanes power plant. But what we also see is that within that volcanic belt, there's a lot of green areas, which are nature conservation areas. Well, if we look at Ethiopia, then we have a volcanic belt or high temperature area that lies also from the southwest to the northeast. And it's a part of the African Rift Valley. And within there are a lot of potential geothermal sites. What we will be looking at is the project in Corbeti caldera, which is located 250 kilometers south of Addis Ababa. And what we can say is that it is estimated, at least from the African Rift Valley in general, that the potential power generation is measured in tens of thousands of megawatts. So it's clear that we have a lot of potential geothermal sites. So let's improve the EI process and learn from the past projects. And then therefore we should start by looking at the characteristics of geothermal projects and why they are different from others. It's very important to understand why these projects are different, or in what way they are different, to understand the limitation of the EIA process. The geothermal projects are different because, in general, they are dynamic in nature, and due to that, they create uncertainty. So it's not just uncertainty about all the financing that we've heard over the last 2 days. It's also uncertainty about the location and the environmental impact. Therefore, these projects are evolving during time. And this is unlike other projects like transmission lines, hydropowers, or highways that are quite static. We know the extent of the project quite well, and we can describe the potential environmental impact with relative certainty. So there's quite a lot of difference in that category. But we also have natural changes within the project area, which most often are in the form of earthquakes. And the earthquakes can change the reservoir, and that calls for a change in the location of necessary facilities of the utilization. So geothermal utilization is an ongoing learning process. We have uncertainty about and around the environmental impact assessment of each project, which have been difficult to define, or there has been some difficulty in the EIA system to understand that uncertainty, because the system is used to get a very definitive or clear information on other projects. They do ask for the same information for geothermal projects. And what makes these uncertainties more difficult to discuss or handle in the EI system is that these projects are most often located within conservation areas. As we saw in the slide of Iceland, we saw that a lot of high temperature areas are within conservation areas. And we heard yesterday from Dr. Yasukawa that 80% of all potential geothermal projects are within national parks. So there's conflicting interest, and they're obvious that we need to approach these areas with precaution and acknowledge that not all sites are fit for development. So let's go to the comparison. These are the EIA process both in Iceland and Ethiopia. They are quite similar, and the objective of the EIA acts in both countries are similar also. But they differ in two aspects. In Iceland, one needs to publish a preliminary or initial environmental impact statement, and you need to have a consultation, public consultation on that statement, and the developer then has to write the final impact statement by addressing how he has taken consideration of those comments during consultation. It's a very important part of geothermal projects because this is a learning process, and so it's very important that there's a close dialogue altogether. In Ethiopia, there is a very interesting step that is called Environmental and Social Monitoring Plan, which is necessary to have as a part of the environmental impact statement. And that's something that we'll talk about on a later stage. But these are the main differences in the process itself. Well, then it's a project area. Here we have arrived at Reykjanes and Korbetti, and the approach of how we define the project area is quite different. In Iceland, it has been you have to define the project area rather narrowly or tight, and here we have the Reykjanes power plant. The EIA has been ongoing since 1997. And that's exactly the same year I started working on EIA. But during that time, we have taken 10 steps, applying 10 steps in the EIA process for applying for 180 megawatts. In my opinion, that's quite a lot of number of steps. And these steps include additional impact statements, screening, appeal to the ministry, and all these steps here include the alteration in the location of power plant, alteration in location of drilling sites or additional drilling, and the discharge of wastewater. And the total project area is 570 hectares. And when we start in that process, we have to locate at very pinpoint location where the drilling pads are going to be, where the power plant is going to be, and the pipelines. In Korbetti, however, in Ethiopia, we approach the research area. It was a very large research area, but then it was possible to define the project area for 3,600 hectares. And within that, the developer wants to construct up to 300 megawatts power plant, which will be built in at least 2 steps. In that process, it was available to define the project area without locating exactly where the drilling pads and where the power stations would be. And that's quite a lot of leeway or for the developer. However, in the EI process, we defined which area one could not have projects within. And we'll see how, to be sure, in my opinion, the aerial approach, where you define a large area and you try to define where not to locate projects due to environmental consideration or social consideration, this is much more suited for geothermal projects because it's dynamic in nature. You do not know always where to locate the next drilling pad, and etc. When we look at the environmental and social factors, they are quite the same that need to be addressed in both countries. In Iceland, we have the emphasis on landscape, geology, and water, and of course many other factors. And in Ethiopia, we had emphasis on land use and water. But what was different there was the emphasis on social impact, something that we are not used to here in Iceland. But the emphasis was not just about social negative impacts. It was as much as on social benefits of the project. Hence, the discussion about the project was not always negative, but also on positive notes. And that is important. Then if we go to the consultation and compare that, that's quite a little bit different also. And and as I've been saying, it's important for all actors in the EIA process to learn from past experience. And one way to do that is through the consulting phase of the EIA process. And I think it would be very interesting also for the financial people that have been in this conference to take part of this consultation, also to see what are the factors being looked at the early stage. The consultation involves all actors in both cases, but in Iceland the actors have closer contact with each other. It's more dialogue direct between actors than in the Ethiopian system. The ministry oversees the consultation in Ethiopia. The developer must introduce the project to the public, its impacts and possible compensations, while they are writing the impact statement. The ministry, on the other hand, oversees the contact with the consulting bodies without direct participation of the developer. Hence, there is a gap there between consultation bodies and the developer. And in my opinion, the approach of the consultation in Iceland is better suited to improve the project and the learning process of geothermal projects due to the direct talk between actors. And also because we will hear from later on that a lot of the data that is gathered are complicated and diverse scientific data, and it's important to have a discussion on what that means for everyone. Hence, here the Icelandic system scores higher. Then it's the monitoring plan. In Iceland, there is no requirement for an actual monitoring plan in the impact statement. But we have some kind of overview of the proposed actions, follow-up and mitigation measures. And further conditions to the project can be made in the detail or local plan, and when the municipality gives out the permit, it can condition it even further and ask for further mitigation measures or follow-up. But this is never in one particular document. It is, well, we could say it's all over the place, the information about the follow-up and monitoring. However, in Ethiopia, you need to have the environmental monitoring plan. And the role of the plan is to ensure that implementation of the project complies with the findings of the environmental assessment and local and legislation and regulations and environmental standards, and also requirements of financial institutions. The monitoring involves procedures and mechanisms that will be used to modify and reshape the project in the light of monitoring results. The plan is to measure how well the mitigation is working and document unexpected impacts of the project. And the follow-up here includes reporting on environmental performances of the developer to the interested and affected parties, and also to establish whether agreed measures are being implemented on time and to adequate standards. So, in my opinion, an actual monitoring plan is an important tool for the geothermal project, and it's an important factor for all follow-up of the findings of the assessment. Because if we are using the aerial approach, as in Corbett, there is some leeway for the developer. But by using the monitoring plan, there is a strict guidelines he has to follow when he is locating the drilling pads and the power plants. So there is no discount on environmental standards, but gives him the important leeway that we've been talking about. And there I got the yellow card.
Oh.
And the conclusions are quite, at least in my opinion, use an aerial approach. Larger project areas, and include and define rather zones of no projects. This is in order to accommodate the dynamic nature of the geothermal projects. Improve the consultation. It's important to have a dialogue on the uncertainties and on the gathered data. So every actor learns about the enhancement of the project. And also to understand what kind of uncertainty we have within the project. And I think another, I would say, use a monitoring plan. That's something that we should do straight away here in Iceland to deal with the uncertainty of the impact and make a stepwise development for all geothermal projects, and have it each step should be larger than a singular drilling pad. So these are the findings. We can improve the EI process with relative ease, and we do not have to change the EIA Act to do this. This is just just a type of action we can take. I'll end with borrowing some words from the foreign ministers again. Thank you for your beautiful silence. Thank you.